The holographic star map flickered in the dim chamber as 47 species watched David Ross walk toward the central platform. His footsteps echoed against crystalline walls that had witnessed 1,000 diplomatic victories and twice as many failures. Behind him, Commander Brent Cole carried a data tablet that held evidence capable of shattering the fragile peace the Galactic Council claimed to maintain. High Chancellor Mirkin spread his feathered wings in a gesture meant to intimidate. The avian leader had ruled council proceedings for 3 centuries, and his golden eyes burned with barely concealed contempt for the humans standing before him. Envoy Ross, you appear before this assembly to answer for acts of barbarism committed by your species, Mirkan announced, his voice amplified through translation crystals embedded in every delegate's seat. David didn't flinch. He'd spent 18 months as colonial administrator on New Haven before accepting this diplomatic posting. He knew what barbarism actually looked like. I'm here to provide context, High Chancellor, he replied evenly. Something this council seems to have forgotten how to seek. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Lyra, her reptilian features unreadable behind protective membranes, leaned forward in her seat. The context is simple, human. Your forces destroyed an entire fleet. 40 warships reduced to debris. Not a single survivor to tell their version of events. This is the context that troubles us. Brent's jaw tightened, but David placed a subtle hand on his arm. The commander had lost friends on New Haven. 3 of his former academy classmates had been teaching at the colony's engineering school when the attack came. Their bodies were still being identified from dental records. May I present my evidence? David asked, gesturing to the data tablet. Speaker Tovrin, an ancient being whose aquatic species had mediated conflicts for millennia, nodded his massive head. The council recognizes your right to testimony. Proceed. David activated the holographic display. The star map vanished, replaced by images of New Haven before the attack. Green fields stretched beneath twin suns. Children played in parks while their parents tended crops that would feed a dozen systems. Schools, hospitals, art centers. All the infrastructure of a peaceful settlement built over 30 years of hard work and hope. New Haven. Colony population. 203,847 civilians. David's voice remained steady, though his hands trembled slightly. Primary industries. Agricultural research and grain export. Military presence. 112 defense personnel manning 3 orbital platforms designed for asteroid deflection. Average age of colonists, 34 standard years. Percentage of population under age 15, 32%. He paused, letting those numbers sink in. Nearly a third of the colony had been children. 3 weeks ago, at 0600 local time, 40 unknown vessels emerged from hyperspace directly above New Haven. No hails, no identification codes, no warning whatsoever. The holographic display shifted to sensor recordings. Delegates watched as massive warships appeared in formation, their weapons already charging. A Prel delegate in. The back rows shifted uncomfortably. His species had lost a mining colony to similar tactics 40 years prior. The defense platforms attempted communication. They received no response. Targeting locks were detected on population centers. The platforms moved to intercept and were destroyed in the opening salvo. David's voice grew harder. Then the bombardment began. He showed them everything. Ground-level footage from security cameras captured the moment kinetic rounds struck the primary. School in New Bethel. The building simply ceased to exist, along with 800 children and 60 teachers. Medical centers evaporated under focused energy weapons. Residential sectors were systematically targeted, block by block, with mathematical precision designed to maximize casualties. Several delegates looked away. Others watched in horrified fascination. Mirkan's feathers ruffled, but his expression remained stern. This bombardment continued for 6 hours, David continued. Citizens attempted to evacuate, but there was nowhere to run. Underground shelters were collapsed by ground-penetrating munitions. Transport ships trying to flee were shot down. The attacking fleet maintained orbital superiority and continued firing even after all defensive capabilities had been eliminated, Ambassador Lyra's membranes had turned pale. Surely there was some provocation, some territorial dispute. New Haven was legally settled 30 years ago. Registration confirmed by this very council. Territory surveys approved. Settlement charter validated. David's eyes blazed. I brought the documents if you'd like to review them again. Mirkin interjected. The fleet you destroyed claimed that space as their sovereign territory. They had rights. They had 6 hours to claim anything. David cut him off, something no one had dared do in living memory. 6 hours while they murdered civilians. Not once did they transmit demands. Not once did they request negotiation. They came to exterminate. Nothing more. The chamber fell silent. Even the translation crystals seemed to dim. Our distress signal reached the Fifth Fleet 4 hours into the attack. Admiral Patricia Ward made the jump at maximum burn, arriving 8 hours after the bombardment began. She found the attacking fleet still firing on what remained of our cities. David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, still killing our people. He pulled up the tactical display. The Fifth Fleet engaged. Immediately, they gave the attackers every opportunity to stand down, to communicate, to surrender. Every opportunity your protocols demand. The attacking force ignored all hails and continued their bombardment, even while under fire from our ships. Brent stepped forward, adding quietly. The engagement lasted 47 minutes. Standard doctrine, when facing opponents who refuse all communication and persist in attacking civilian targets. We followed every rule of engagement humanity has. Learned through centuries of our own brutal conflicts. David turned to face Mirkin directly. You want to discuss proportionate response, High Chancellor? Let me tell you about proportion. 89,214 dead. Mostly women, children, and elderly citizens who couldn't reach shelter in time. Another 12,000 injured, many of whom will never fully recover. A colony that fed millions across the sector reduced to ruins. He gestured at the holographic display showing the destroyed attack fleet. This is what remained of the force that did that. And you dare call our response barbaric? The question hung in the air, like a blade. No one spoke. No one moved. David took a breath, steadying himself. High Chancellor, you asked me a question when this session began. Let me ask you one in return. His eyes swept across every delegate in the chamber. Do any of you have children? The unexpected question caught them off guard. Several delegates nodded. Others remained still. Then perhaps you can understand, David said softly, what it means to receive a transmission from your daughter's teacher, begging for help. That will never arrive in time. His voice cracked slightly. What it means to watch recordings of parents trying to shield their children with their own bodies as kinetic rounds tore through both. What it means to know that while we debated proper diplomatic channels and waited for council authorization to defend ourselves, thousands of families were being erased from existence. The silence was absolute. New Haven called for help. David continued. They followed every protocol. They trusted that the Galactic Council's promise of collective security meant something. He looked at each delegate in turn. They died still believing someone would save them. The medical transport base smelled of antiseptic and grief. 3 days after Admiral Ward's fleet secured New Haven's orbit, recovery teams were still pulling survivors from collapsed shelters. David Ross had walked through the ruins before coming to this council session, and the images were burned into his memory forever. Now he stood in the Galactic Council chamber, watching delegates shift uncomfortably as his words echoed off crystalline walls. High Chancellor Mirkan's feathers had settled, flat against his body, a sign of unease in his species. Ambassador Lyra's membranes flickered between pale and flushed as she processed what she'd seen. Envoy Ross, Speaker Toverin's deep voice rumbled. No one disputes that New Haven suffered grievously, but the complete annihilation of the attacking force raises questions about humanity's capacity for restraint. Surely some vessels could have been disabled rather than destroyed. Prisoners taken for questioning. Prisoners, David repeated. The word like it tasted of ash. He activated another section of the holographic display. Let me show you what we learned from the wreckage. The display shifted to recovered data cores from the destroyed flagship. Brent Cole had personally overseen the salvage operation, diving into debris fields that still radiated heat from their violent end. What they found had confirmed humanity's worst fears. "This is Commander Drakthor's personal log, recovered from his ship's black box," David explained. The translation matrix struggled with the harsh syllables of the Korvax language before settling into standard galactic. A voice filled the chamber, cold and clinical. "Cleansing operation proceeding as planned. Civilian centers prioritized per doctrine. Resistance minimal. Second wave will process remaining infrastructure. Recommend biological survey teams deploy once bombardment reaches 80% casualty threshold." Several delegates recoiled, the casual discussion of mass murder as routine operation made even hardened diplomats uncomfortable. David let the recording continue. "Resource extraction projections favorable. Human genetic material shows potential for slave labor applications. Recommend capture of surviving technical personnel for forced breeding programs. Children under 10 may be suitable for indoctrination facilities." He stopped the playback. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush stone. "They didn't come to conquer," David said quietly. "They came to exterminate most of us and enslave the rest." This wasn't war. It was genocide with a business plan. A delegate from the Harani Union stood abruptly. His species had lost a research station to Korvax expansion decades ago, though the Council had ruled it a territorial misunderstanding. "We tried to warn this body," the Harani said, his voice shaking. "We brought evidence of similar attacks. We were told to pursue diplomatic solutions." He turned to Mirkan. "How many more species must lose their people before the Council acknowledges the pattern?" Mirkan's golden eyes narrowed. The Harani incident was investigated thoroughly. The Korvax paid reparations. They paid money and kept our territory. The Harani interrupted. "They killed 14 of our brightest scientists and called it an accident. And this council let them because you fear confrontation more than you value justice." David watched the exchange with grim satisfaction. The council's careful neutrality was crumbling under the weight of accumulated failures. He pressed his advantage. "6 months ago, I stood in this very chamber," David said. "I presented intelligence indicating Korvax interest in human space. I showed you their fleet movements. I requested mediation, peacekeeping forces, anything to prevent escalation." He pulled up the archived records. "High Chancellor Mirkan personally dismissed my concerns as paranoia from an inexperienced species." The recording played. Mirkan's own voice filled the chamber. "Humanity must learn that every perceived slight is not an act of war. The Korvax Dominion has every right to patrol their borders. Your accusations are baseless and beneath the dignity of this council." Request denied. Mirkan's feathers ruffled in agitation. That intelligence was inconclusive. The Korvax claimed they were conducting routine exercises while positioning strike fleets within jump range of our colonies. Brent interjected. "Standard pre-invasion staging. Any military analyst could have seen it." David continued relentlessly. "We followed every protocol. We filed formal complaints. We requested observer missions. We asked for nothing more than what this council promises all member species. Collective security." His voice rose. "And you told us to handle it diplomatically, to not provoke the Korvax, to trust that the council would protect us." He gestured at the holographic display, still showing New Haven's burning cities. "This is what your protection bought us. 89,000 corpses and a generation of traumatized survivors." Ambassador Lyra finally spoke, her voice strained. "What would you have had us do, Envoy Ross? Send fleets to police every border dispute? The Council cannot maintain forces sufficient to protect every system. Then what exactly is the point of this Council?" David shot back. "You claim authority over galactic affairs but accept no responsibility when member species are attacked. You investigate atrocities but never punish perpetrators. You promise security but deliver only condolences after the fact." The Prel delegate stood again. "The human speaks truth we have all avoided. My people lost 3,000 citizens to Korvax aggression 40 years ago. This council condemned the action, demanded reparations, and ultimately did nothing when the Korvax simply ignored your judgment." He looked around at the other delegates. "How many of us have similar stories? How many times have we accepted acceptable losses because confronting aggressors was inconvenient?" Murmurs spread through the chamber. Species that had suffered quietly for decades suddenly found their voices. The careful fiction that the Council's non-intervention policy kept the peace was dissolving. Speaker Tovrin raised his massive fins, calling for order. These grievances, while noted, do not address the immediate question. Humanity responded to aggression with overwhelming force. The precedent this sets cannot be ignored. If every species adopts such tactics, we face endless cycles of retaliation and counter-retaliation. David stepped closer to the speaker's platform. You're right, precedent matters. So let's discuss the precedent the Council has set. He counted on his fingers. Precedent 1. Attackers face no meaningful consequences. Precedent 2. Victims receive sympathy, but no support. Precedent 3. Aggressors can test boundaries repeatedly because the Council values peace over justice. He locked eyes with Tovrin. Under those precedents, what exactly did you expect us to do? Wait while the Korvax refine their tactics? Trust that the next attack would somehow prompt action when 6 months of warnings didn't? Watch our colonies burn one by one while this council debated appropriate responses. Brent added coldly. Humanity has studied history extensively. We know what happens when aggression goes unpunished. We've lived through it ourselves. We will not repeat those mistakes simply to make others comfortable. David turned back to address the full council. You want to know why we destroyed that fleet completely? Because we learned a hard truth during Earth's darkest centuries. If you're going to fight, you fight to win. Half measures just guarantee you'll have to fight again. The Korvax came to exterminate us. We made sure they understood the cost of that decision. Across the galaxy, 12-year-old Sarah Williams sat in a temporary shelter on New Haven, drawing pictures of her house before it became a crater. Her mother worked double shifts in the medical tents, treating injuries that would never fully heal. Her father's name was carved on the memorial wall they were building downtown, along with 89,213 others. Sarah didn't understand politics or councils or diplomatic protocols. She understood that monsters came from the sky and killed her dad. She understood that more monsters might come unless someone stopped them. Children throughout human space shared her fear, and their parents remembered what David Ross was fighting for in that distant council chamber. You speak of precedent, David continued, his voice cutting through the murmurs of debate. Let me tell you about the precedent that truly matters. Throughout Earth's history, there's a pattern that repeats. Aggressors test boundaries. They probe. Defenses, they commit small violations to gauge response. He walked slowly around the central platform, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of species. When those violations go unpunished, they escalate. When the international community offers only words, aggressors hear permission. We've seen this pattern destroy civilizations. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning this lesson. David stopped, facing High Chancellor Mirkan directly, and we will not unlearn it to satisfy your philosophy of comfortable inaction. Mirkan rose to his full height, wings spreading wide. You dare lecture this council on peace? Your species has barely achieved spaceflight. We have maintained galactic stability for 10,000 years. By sacrificing the weak, David interrupted, by allowing strong predators to hunt the vulnerable as long as they don't threaten core systems. By accepting that some species are expendable, his eyes blazed. Well, humanity is not expendable. Our children are not acceptable losses, and we will not participate in a system that treats them as such. Ambassador Lyra stood, her voice surprisingly gentle. Envoy Ross, please understand. The Council's approach has prevented countless wars. Yes, some suffer, but the alternative is galactic-scale conflict that would kill billions. We seek the greatest good for the greatest number. Who decides which numbers matter? Brent asked quietly. Our 89,000 dead don't count because humanity is new? Because we're not ancient enough to deserve full protection? He gestured at the Prel and Hirani delegates. The losses don't matter because their species are small? Where exactly is the threshold where lives become worth defending? The question hung in the air. No one answered. David pressed forward. 6 species have lost colonies to Korvax aggression in the past century. This council investigated all 6 incidents, found the Korvax guilty in all 6 cases, issued condemnations, demanded reparations, promised consequences. He paused. And in all 6 cases, the Korvax paid a fine smaller than their profit from the seized territory and continued expanding. His voice grew bitter. Your greatest good seems highly selective about who it protects. A new voice entered the debate. The delegate from Sorrows for, a species humanity had barely interacted with, rose slowly. The human speaks uncomfortable truths. My world lost 2 orbital habitats to what this council termed unfortunate accidents 3 decades ago. 7,000 citizens died. The Korvax claimed their weapons malfunctioned during routine exercises. She looked at Mirkan. This council accepted that explanation despite evidence suggesting deliberate targeting. We were told that pursuing the matter would destabilize regional peace. Other delegates began standing. Species humanity didn't even recognize added their stories. Mining colonies disappeared. Research stations went silent. Transport convoys vanished without trace. In each case, the council investigated, issued reports, and ultimately did nothing that might risk confrontation with powerful species like the Korvax. David watched the dam break. Decades of suppressed grievances poured out. The council's carefully maintained facade of universal protection crumbled under the weight of accumulated failures. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern of systemic abandonment. Speaker Tovrin finally called for order, his massive voice overriding the chaos. Enough. These grievances, while regrettable, do not change the fundamental question before us. Humanity's response to aggression was disproportionate by any standard military doctrine. Complete fleet annihilation shows a concerning disregard for proportional response. Proportional to what? David asked coldly. Proportional to their attack on our civilians? They fired on population centers for 6 hours. They targeted schools, hospitals, shelters. They had clear genocidal intent. He activated another holographic display. Admiral Ward's rules of engagement were crystal clear. Disable hostile vessels if possible. Destroy them if they continue engaging civilian targets. The tactical recording played. Human ships broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding surrender. Korvax vessels ignoring all communication, maintaining bombardment even while under fire. Individual Korvax ships being disabled, then immediately self-destructing rather than be captured. The message was clear. They preferred death to facing consequences for their actions. They chose suicide over surrender, Brent explained. Standard Korvax doctrine when defeat becomes inevitable. They destroy their own ships to prevent intelligence capture. Admiral Ward's fleet disabled 17 vessels. All 17 self-destructed. The remaining 23 were destroyed in direct combat after refusing all communication and continuing to fire on both civilian and military targets. Ambassador Lyra processed this information. You're saying they gave you no choice? They made their choice when they targeted our children, David replied. They made it again when they refused to stand down, and they made it a 3rd time when they self-destructed rather than face justice. He looked around the chamber. We're not apologizing for surviving. We're not apologizing for defending our families. And we're certainly not apologizing for making sure the message was clear. Attack human civilians, and there will be no safe retreat. High Chancellor Mirkan's feathers bristled. And that message terrifies half the species in this chamber. You've demonstrated capacity for ruthless efficiency in warfare. How do we know humanity won't turn that capability against others? David met his gaze steadily. Because we only fight those who attack us first. Because we exhausted every diplomatic option before defending ourselves. Because even in the heat of battle, our forces followed rules of engagement and attempted to minimize casualties. He gestured at the tactical display. But most importantly, because we've learned something this council apparently hasn't. The best way to prevent war is to make the cost of aggression absolutely clear. He turned to address all delegates. Humanity doesn't seek conflict. We came to this council hoping for partnership, for mutual defense, for the collective security you promised. What we found was a bureaucracy that investigates atrocities but never prevents them, that condemns aggression but never punishes it, that promises protection but delivers only paperwork after bodies are counted. The Prel delegate spoke again. What do you propose instead, Envoy Ross? That we abandon the council? Form our own alliance? David paused. This was the moment he'd been building toward. No. I propose we force this council to honor its own founding principles. Either collective security means something real, or it means nothing at all. Either member species receive actual protection, or this council exists only to make the powerful comfortable while the weak suffer. The council chamber descended into controlled chaos as delegates argued among themselves. Ancient species defended their cautious philosophy, while newer members questioned whether survival was possible under such a system. High Chancellor Mirkin called repeatedly for order, his voice lost in the din of voices speaking dozens of languages simultaneously. David Ross stood at the center platform, watching the galactic order fracture along fault lines that had existed for centuries. Beside him, Commander Brent Cole monitored incoming messages on his secure tablet. What he saw made him lean close to David's ear. "Admiral Ward confirms the coalition is ready," Brent whispered. 6 species, 43 warships. They're holding position just outside the neutral zone, waiting for your signal. David nodded slightly. The message Admiral Ward sent earlier had contained more than tactical updates. It included formal defense pacts signed by species the Council had failed to protect. Humanity hadn't just responded to the New Haven attack. They'd built an alternative to the Council's empty promises. Speaker Tovarin finally restored order through sheer volume. His booming voice silenced the debates. "Envoy Ross, you speak of forcing the Council to honor its principles. What specifically do you demand?" Before David could answer, a new presence entered the chamber. Security personnel stepped aside as 3 tall, armored figures strode through the entrance. Their scaled skin bore the distinctive crimson markings of the Korvax Dominion. The chamber fell instantly silent. High Commander Drakmor led the Korvax delegation, his movements radiating arrogance. He'd commanded the Korvax military for 6 decades, expanding their territory through carefully calculated aggression. He'd never faced meaningful resistance before. The loss of an entire fleet was unprecedented in his career. "High Chancellor," Drakmor's voice rumbled through the translation system. "The Korvax Dominion demands this council address the unprovoked massacre of our peaceful exploration fleet. The humans attacked without warning, slaughtering 40 ships engaged in legitimate territorial survey operations." David's expression didn't change. He'd expected this. The Korvax would never admit to genocide. They'd reframe the narrative, claim victimhood, and exploit the Council's preference for avoiding uncomfortable truths. Mirkin looked between David and Drakmor, clearly hoping for an easy resolution. "High Commander, your arrival is timely. Perhaps we can hear all perspectives before reaching conclusions." "There's only one perspective that matters," Drakmor interrupted. "The Korvax Dominion has rights under galactic law. Your human pets violated those rights. We demand reparations and immediate withdrawal from disputed territories." The word pets hung in the air. It was a calculated insult, designed to provoke an emotional response that would undermine humanity's position. David felt. Brent tensed beside him, but remained perfectly calm. "High Commander Drakmor," David said pleasantly. "Thank you for joining us. Your timing is indeed fortunate. I was just about to present evidence that directly concerns your fleet's activities." Drakmor's eyes narrowed. "What evidence could you possibly have?" "We destroyed all your defense platforms." He stopped, realizing his mistake. David smiled without warmth. "Interesting choice of words. I thought your fleet was engaged in peaceful exploration." He activated the holographic display before Drakmor could recover. "Let me show the Council what peaceful exploration looks like." The display shifted to show communications intercepts before the attack. New Haven's long-range sensors had detected Korvax transmissions and automatically recorded them. The translation matrix worked through military codes the Korvax thought secure. Commander Drakthor's voice filled the chamber. "All ships, weapons free on designated civilian targets. Priority Alpha. Educational facilities, medical centers, population clusters. Minimize infrastructure damage to preserve resource value. Secondary objectives include capture of technical personnel for forced labor programs. Third wave will deploy biological survey teams once casualty threshold reaches 80%. Drakmor's scaled face flushed darker. Those recordings are fabricated. Human propaganda, authenticated by the Prel Independent Intelligence Service. The Prel delegate interjected. We've been monitoring Korvac's military communications for 40 years. The encryption signatures match perfectly. These are genuine, David continued. The Council will also be interested in this. Another recording played. Drac Thor again. Recommend immediate termination of all civilian population to prevent resistance. Children under 10 may have salvage value for indoctrination facilities. Eliminate the rest. Total cleansing operation to be completed within 12 hours. Several delegates looked physically ill. The clinical discussion of child slavery and mass murder destroyed any remaining credibility the Korvax might have claimed. Drakmor attempted recovery. Military communications can be misinterpreted. Cultural differences in language. There's no cultural difference that makes. Eliminate all civilians mean peaceful exploration, Ambassador Lyra said sharply. Her earlier uncertainty had vanished. High Commander, these recordings are damning. Combined with the attack pattern Envoy Ross documented, they prove genocidal intent. The Hirani delegate stood. My people's intelligence service recovered similar communication from the attack on our research station. The Korvax used identical language, identical tactics. This is not an isolated incident. It is standard Korvax military doctrine. Other species began sharing their own evidence. Decades of suppressed intelligence reports surfaced. The pattern was undeniable. The Korvax Dominion had systematically targeted vulnerable colonies, exterminated populations, and seized territory while the Council looked away. Drakmor's composure cracked. This Council has no authority to question Korvax sovereignty. We have the right to defend our borders. New Haven was 300 light-years from your nearest border. Brent said flatly. Your fleet traveled for 2 weeks to reach it. That's not border defense. That's premeditated invasion. Speaker Tovrin's expression had shifted from neutral to grave. High Commander Drakmor, the evidence presented is extremely serious. The Council must investigate. Investigate? David's voice cut through. Like you investigated the Prel colony? The Hirani station? The Sorrows habitats? He turned to face the full Council. How many investigations does it take before you actually do something? Drakmor sensed opportunity in the tension. The humans seek to divide this Council. They want you to abandon centuries of peaceful tradition. Don't let their barbaric nature corrupt. Our barbaric nature saved 3 colonies you were planning to attack next, David interrupted. He pulled up new intelligence. This is the Korvax fleet deployment schedule, recovered from your flagship's wreckage. After New Haven, you had operations planned against Brel 2, Sardo's colony, and the Hirani mining complex. All within 6 months. The named species delegates went rigid. The Korvax had been planning a coordinated campaign of genocide across multiple systems. David continued relentlessly. You thought you could test your tactics on an isolated human colony, refine your approach, then roll it out across the sector. You counted on the Council doing exactly what they've always done: investigate, condemn, and ultimately ignore. He looked at Drakmor with cold fury. You made one critical error. You assumed humans would behave like the Council, that we'd file complaints and wait for justice that never comes, that we'd accept our dead as the price of galactic peace. Brent stepped forward. High Commander, humanity learned something about warfare that this Council apparently hasn't. If you want peace, you must make war too costly to wage. Your fleet came to exterminate us. We made sure every Korvax commander knows exactly what that decision costs. David Ross watched High Commander Drakmor's composure shatter completely. The Korvax warrior had built his career on the assumption that victims would always be too weak to resist and galactic authorities too timid to intervene. The destruction of his fleet had upended that calculus. Now he faced something worse: public exposure of decades of war crimes. This is a coordinated attack on Korvax sovereignty, Drakmor snarled. The Council must recognize. The Council must recognize nothing. David interrupted. Your sovereignty ends where genocide begins. Your rights don't include exterminating civilian populations. He turned to address all delegates. And this Council's authority ends the moment it prioritizes protocol over protection. High Chancellor Mirkin finally found his voice. Envoy Ross, you cannot dictate terms to this assembly. The council has procedures. Your procedures killed 89,000 of my people, David said quietly. The chamber fell silent at his tone. Your procedures allowed the Korvax to plan attacks on 3 more colonies. Your procedures have failed every species in this room that wasn't powerful enough to defend themselves. He paused. So yes, High Chancellor absolutely can dictate terms, because humanity will no longer participate in a system designed to protect aggressors from consequences. Ambassador Lyra leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? David pulled up a document on the holographic display. The Mutual Defense Coalition, signed by humanity, the Prel Confederacy, Hirani Union, Saros Combine, Brel Federation, and the Torgash clans. 6 species representing 43 warships and a combined population of 2 billion inch. He let that sink in. We're not asking the Council's permission. We're informing you of our decision. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted over each other. Ancient species decried this violation of Council authority. Newer members demanded details. Mirkan's feathers stood on end in rage. Speaker Tovrin called for order. This is unprecedented. Member species cannot form military alliances without Council approval. Show me the law, Brent challenged. The Council Charter guarantees collective security. It says nothing about prohibiting species from defending themselves when that security fails to materialize. We reviewed every treaty. There's no legal barrier to what we're doing. David continued. The coalition has one simple purpose: mutual defense against aggression. If any member is attacked, all members respond. No debates, no committees, no waiting for Council approval. He looked directly at Drakmor. We're making the cost of aggression absolutely clear. Drakmor stood to his full height. The Korvax Dominion will not tolerate this threat. We have the right to defend our interests, then defend them against peer opponents instead of farming colonies. David shot back. The coalition fleet is positioned just outside the neutral zone. Admiral Ward has standing orders. Any Korvax vessel entering coalition space will be treated as hostile. Any attack on coalition members will result in immediate military response. No warnings, no negotiations, just overwhelming force. The Korvax commander's face twisted with fury. You dare threaten the Dominion? We're not threatening anyone, Brent said calmly. We're promising consequences. There's a difference. You're free to stay within your borders and live peacefully. But if you attack us or our allies, again, you'll face the same response your fleet at New Haven received. He smiled without humor. Complete and total destruction. Mirkan attempted to regain control. This council cannot allow member species to form armed coalitions. It destabilizes the entire framework of galactic peace. What peace? The Prel delegate demanded. The peace where my people were slaughtered while you investigated? The peace where the Hirani lost their station while you debated? The peace where humans watched their children die while waiting for council protection that never came? His voice rose. That peace is already broken. We're just acknowledging reality. The Saros delegate stood. My government has reviewed humanity's proposal extensively. The coalition offers what the council promised, but never delivered. Actual security. Real consequences for aggression. Protection based on actions. Not political convenience. She looked at Mirkan. The council had centuries to make this work. You failed. Now we're trying something else. David watched the council fracture. Ancient species clung to their philosophy of patient non-intervention. Newer members recognized that philosophy as a death sentence. The divide had always existed. The New Haven attack had simply made it impossible to ignore. Ambassador Lyra surprised everyone by speaking. The council must adapt or become irrelevant. Her words shocked the assembly. I've served this body for 60 years. I've watched us investigate atrocities we lacked courage to punish. I've seen species suffer while we prioritize stability over justice. She looked at her fellow delegates. The humans are right. Our system protects the powerful and abandons the vulnerable. If we don't reform, we deserve to be replaced. Tovrin studied her carefully. You propose reform? What kind? Start by sanctioning the Korvax, Lyra said firmly. freeze their assets, ban them from council facilities, demand reparations for all documented attacks, not just New Haven. She gestured at the evidence still displayed. We have decades of proof. Use it. Show that this council can actually enforce its own judgments. Drakmore laughed harshly. You think sanctions frighten us? The Dominion will simply withdraw from this farce. Then withdraw, David said. The coalition doesn't need council approval to defend ourselves, but it would be better for everyone if the council finally stood for something real. He softened slightly. We're not trying to destroy galactic unity. We're trying to make it mean something. Protection that actually protects. Justice that actually punishes. Security based on strength, not just promises. Mirkin looked around the chamber. He saw the fractures, the divisions, the species ready to abandon ship. His centuries of careful diplomacy were collapsing. Finally, he spoke. The council will vote. Formal sanctions against the Korvax Dominion for documented attacks on civilian populations. All in favor. The vote wasn't unanimous. Ancient species abstained, unwilling to abandon their philosophy completely, but enough delegates supported it. The measure passed. For the first time in living memory, the council imposed meaningful consequences on a major power. Drakmore stood frozen, unable to process this outcome. You'll regret this. All of you. The Dominion as allies, who won't risk facing the same treatment, Brent observed. Your allies watched an entire fleet get destroyed in 47 minutes. They're doing the math right now. Is defending Korvax expansion worth that risk? He shook his head. I don't think they'll find the numbers favorable. David turned to Speaker Tovrin. The coalition remains open to cooperation with the council, but we will not compromise on our core principle. Attacks on civilians demand overwhelming response. Aggressors must face consequences, not investigations. He paused. If this council can embrace that standard, we'll gladly work within it. If not, we'll work around it. Tovrin nodded slowly. Perhaps both systems can coexist, the council maintaining diplomatic frameworks, the coalition providing the strength to enforce them. He looked at the assembled delegates. Maybe the humans have taught us something important. Peace requires both wisdom and power. We've had wisdom without power for too long. 3 months later, David stood at the New Haven Memorial. 89,214 names carved in black stone. Children played in the rebuilt park nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of construction as the colony rose from ashes. Admiral Ward stood beside him. The Korvax haven't crossed into coalition space since the council vote. Intelligence suggests they're having internal debates about whether expansion is worth the cost anymore. David nodded. Good. Maybe they'll learn. Maybe they won't. He touched the memorial wall gently. But if they attack again, they'll face the same response. We made a promise to everyone who died here. Never again. Above them, 5 coalition warships maintained eternal vigil, each named for a destroyed city, each crewed by survivors who refused to forget. The galaxy had changed. Victims no longer waited patiently for justice. They built their own. In the council chamber on Harmony 7, reforms continued slowly. The coalition's example forced changes the ancient species had resisted for centuries. Protection meant something real now. Aggressors faced actual consequences, and throughout the galaxy, species that had suffered in silence found their voices. Sarah Williams, now 13, placed flowers at her father's name on the memorial. She didn't fully understand the politics, but she knew that monsters had come, and humans had made sure they couldn't come again. That was enough. She smiled, turned away from the memorial, and ran to join her friends. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Humanity had taught it well.